Hello, everybody. My name is Bruce Montgomery, and this is my colleague, Tracy Priest.
Hello, everybody.
And we're with The Road to Retail. On our podcast, Tracy and I hope to offer tips, insights, ideas, and examples for how small, emerging, and challenger CPG, consumer packaged goods, brands can build their business. Everything from determining if you're ready to grow, where to start, how to prove it online, or how to go about securing distribution at a national retailer, driving your business through to the end consumer, or how to go about finding an investor if you're ready for that aspect. Bottom line is we would love to help you be successful by highlighting the many important aspects of this journey to establishing and growing your brand. Tracy and I have been doing this a long time. We've made a lot of mistakes, and we've done a few good things, so we're here to help you. Please follow our podcast on iTunes or Spotify, leave us a review, and consider sharing the show with a friend or colleague that may benefit from the content. Tracy?
Bruce and I have been involved in consumer packaged goods commercial operations roles for over 30 years. We define commercial operation functions relating to sales, marketing, trade marketing, broker and distributor management, agency selection and management, new product development, brand acquisition and divestitures, and customer management. We also invite on our episodes friends and former colleagues from all aspects of the Road to Retail process to come on the show and offer their opinions and experience. Again, we encourage you to subscribe to our iTunes or Spotify channel at Road, 2 Retail.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our latest episode of Road to Retail. Bruce, good to see you today.
Tracy, always good to be seen. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. So tell us who we have today on our latest episode.
Today we have a great guest. We have Rick Miller, who is with the market research firm Big Chalk Insights Analytics. He's going to tell us all about it. And Rick leads their sales and marketing effectiveness practice. Rick, how are you? And thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, I'm doing great, and I'm happy to be here, guys. Can't wait to talk about this stuff.
So as we kick it off here, Rick, why don't you give the group a little background on who Rick Miller is and what's your career path been and how you landed at Big Chalk, and then a little bit about what Big Chalk does.
Absolutely. So I've been in the market research and market analytics game for, going on 30 years now. I have kind of an interesting academic background. My undergraduate degree was in journalism, but my master's degree is in data science. So I am professionally trained to ask questions and also professionally trained to dig up the data to answer them.
Love it.
And as you mentioned, I currently manage the marketing effectiveness practice at Big Chalk. So that means I oversee a whole variety of projects, marketing mix, brand health measurement, pricing strategy, that basically tells our clients, how should they best invest their money? How can they best get their products on shelves? What are their consumers doing or thinking? And I love it. Not many people probably woke up as a kid and said, I want to be a market researcher. And I didn't either because I didn't know what it was. But once I figured it out, it really is my life's calling. So love what I do. People can go to my LinkedIn and see my background. I've worked at IRI Circana. I've worked in the advertising world at Razorfish. I've worked for Gartner Group and consumer tech analytics. So my background is long and varied, but understanding what consumers are doing and how brands have to reach them is truly my passion.
I love it. I love it. Well, good. Well, welcome and thank you for the overview. So let's just jump right in. So tell us a little bit about what Big Chalk can do if you're a small emerging brand. Just tell us a little bit about what you do. I think you touched on it a little bit, but maybe in particular for our small and emerging brand audience today.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me give you the 30-second background on Big Chalk, and it dovetails nicely into your audience, which is small and emerging brands, and you're going to understand why, I think, pretty quickly. So Big Chalk was founded about 8 years ago now, and it was founded by a handful of guys with long experience in, Nielsen, IRI, Numerator, those types of market analytics companies that have served CPG and consumer brands for many, many years. And the impetus for founding the company was based in the direction that some of these companies were going, meaning they were really developing analytics tools and software, some of it really quite good. And they were pushing clients more and more to use analytics tools and software. And what these guys saw 8 years ago was, well, the tools are really cool, but clients don't always feel comfortable using them, even when they say they want them. You still need people to dig through data, to tell a story, to put everything in context. And at the end of the day, most senior executives, as strange as this may sound, they kind of just want to be told what to do. They know they have problems. What they want to know is how to solve them. And so Big Chalk was founded in that premise that you can't just throw software and tools at these problems. You have to have skilled people who can work with those tools and help answer the question. And then the second piece of this, because a lot of the tools have become more democratized, if you will, in terms of what they cost and how you can leverage them. And there's tons of open source stuff out there and lesser cost analytics software out there on the open web now. We felt we could bring these high quality, detailed analytics studies to brands that don't have, $7-8 billion in their marketing budget or their ops budget to go invest in this stuff. We really felt there was a way to bring this to the small and mid market in a way that they could leverage all of the many, many benefits to having high quality analytics without having a $2 million research budget to go do it. And that's what we did. And that was 8 years ago. And the company has grown nicely over 8 years, and we're still growing. And it seems to be a recipe that's working.
That's awesome.
That's great, Rick. So let's dig just a tiny bit deeper there because when Tracy and we've worked for small companies and big companies and helped people of all shapes and sizes, but largely in this small emerging and challenger brands, which is anyone who might be a number 3 and lower or someone who's serving a real niche. When we talk to these founders, a lot of the times we hear, I can't waste the time and money on research, or sometimes unsaid is, I think I already know everything. Can you kind of debunk, and you touched on this a second ago, but let's just dig in. Can you debunk that every research project costs $500,000 and takes 9 months to come in? Can you talk a little bit about the evolution and the way technologies help people kind of really speed up that timeline while also reducing the bill that you get handed at the end of the project?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can give you a couple of real world examples too. So, for example, let's take marketing mix, which is a research project that gets maligned and pilloried, if you will, across the industry, because historically marketing mix is a project that takes, if you've got 2 or 3 brands in your portfolio, $300,000 or $400,000 to do and 20 to 25 weeks to complete the project. Okay.
So Rick, 1 second, just back up a bit and tell people what a marketing mix analysis even is.
Sure. So a marketing mix analysis, for anybody who hasn't had the pleasure or the curse of being associated with one, is a relatively advanced form of analytics that looks at everything a brand is spending on their media and their marketing investments, and then also looks at things like product pricing, macroeconomic conditions, distribution changes. And it boils all this stuff down using some fancy math that nobody that's listening to this call will ever have to worry about on the back end to say, look, you invested X million dollars or X $100,000 in Facebook advertising last year. You got Y $100,000 back. This was either a good investment or a bad investment. You invested, $1 million in TV. You got $1 million back. Okay, you broke even, right? That's what a marketing mix does in a nutshell. And as you can imagine, for decades, really big advertisers, this was the lifeblood of their planning, right? It's what they needed to go make these very, very big bets in media. But again, it was usually staffed by a team of 3 or 4 data scientists. There was a ton of work collecting and cleaning data just to get the project off the ground. And then the modeling and the reporting would take a couple of months. None of that happens now. So on a Big Chalk, we can do that with one data scientist. We've got automated cleaning tools. We've got cloud-based modeling tools that let us deliver these projects in 4 to 6 weeks. And most of them cost under $100,000. Okay. So still a reasonable investment. But when you look at the payoff you get by driving better revenue attached to your media, that investment pays off almost immediately. And there's other things we do that have fallen to that camp, right? Brand health measurement, again, used to be the purview of really large companies. They'd spend a lot of money tracking this year over year. Our ability to track that stuff now using online panel and online surveys has just driven the cost down. It's driven the time to results down. It really has changed the game. And so smaller brands that have maybe started in the marketplace with a gut feel and a thought process of, oh yeah, I've got this product. It's better than the last generation of products like it. I'm going to bring it to market. And I think I know what to do. Well, they probably don't know everything, and they can quickly get help by using, services like ours and others out there, right? That can deliver really, really compelling consumer information and consumer behavior data at scale, at speed. So the game has completely changed, and it's changed just in the last 5 to 10 years. It's not, it's relatively new.
Well, the other thing there, Rick, about what you said is, unless you're a brand founder who's a 2 or 3 time winner, so you've kind of earned your bones, if these emerging brands or founders have taken outside capital, they need services like yours to prove to their investors that they know where their money's going and what they're getting for it. Trust me, doesn't often work. Tracy?
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about some tactics and some levers. So maybe share with our audience, it's primarily, like we said, small and emerging brands, but what levers and tactics have you seen a brand use that has ensured, their success? And maybe in another way to put it is, what does a brand really have to do to make it successful? What are those things that you just got to do those things?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I know my last answer, I just spent, probably 3 minutes talking about how things have changed so much and how things are new. But the answer to this question in some ways is not new at all, right? If you're going to launch a brand and you're going to bring it out to the populace, you still have to have the right value proposition, targeted at the right consumer, at the right price. That's been marketing for hundreds of years, if not longer. And I don't think that much has changed. If you have a brand that you can build some strong consumer emotion around, and not every brand can do that or should, but if you can, great, all the better. But again, not necessarily what's new. What's new is the devil in the details of doing this, right? And that's where the challenge comes in. The idea of launching a brand hasn't changed, but the landscape in which we all have to launch brands, if we're launching new brands now, has changed a lot. First off, let's not to keep harping on media, even though it is a passion point of mine, but think about the media landscape. If you launched a brand 30 years ago, you had network TV to worry about, you had cable TV to worry about, you had print media and maybe direct mail or some other form. And those were really all the choices you had to get the word out about your brand. Well, now the grocery list of media options is 40 or 50 long. I mean, you've still got TV, but now you've got regular TV versus CTV. You've still got print media, but you've got digital publishing sites of a million different flavors to figure out which is, what's going to be the best for you to leverage to get your brand out. You've got mobile devices. You've got digital coupons. You've got just again, the list of things you can invest in is long. And so targeting the right people hasn't changed, but the landscape that you have to navigate to target them has changed a lot.
Right.
So that's a huge thing. The other thing now, and we can maybe blame this on social media as all the old guys in the room here or whatever, but people's attention spans have changed and their loyalties to brands can change very, very quickly, right? When something goes viral in a positive way, it can totally embrace the consumer, can bring them into your brand in a way that you might not have been able to do even through traditional media or marketing. But on the same token, if something goes wrong, rightly or wrongly, right? Some big part of this is sometimes misinformation you have to counter as well. But rightly or wrongly, if there's something negative about your brand out there now, the damage can happen really, really fast. And the damage can take a long time to recover from, because collecting all these consumers that engage with media through all these different channels is so much harder. It's much different than going on the 3 networks and, doing a news segment and posting a retraction or telling the story from your angle. It has all changed. So again, the value prop hasn't changed. Finding the right people hasn't changed. Pricing properly hasn't changed. But the ways that you have to do this now have changed a lot.
That's good. Great insight. Bruce?
So Rick, as you know, retailers are way more concerned about how their category performs than, Bruce's excellent brand, right? How do you, what tools do you have to prove incrementality? So first off, you're talking to the brand team first, saying, hey, we need to make sure that this is actually going to be incremental to the category. So let's assume that, well, you can tell us what tools you'd use there, but then how do you package that information along with any other tool or study that you guys might do to help a sales team go into fill in the blank, Kroger, Target, XYZ, and sell this in? What are the kind of must-haves? It's like, Bruce, you got to do at least these 2 things.
I would say there's really 3 things that you need to do. And full disclosure, Big Chalk doesn't do all 3. We do 2 out of the 3. But the first thing I would do if I was leading a brand is I would look at the assortment analytics or do an assortment study. Because a good assortment study, and you can get that from any of the major players out there, is going to tell you when I add a product to shelf or I take a product off shelf, what is the incrementality that product is going to bring to a retailer's shelf. Now, Big Chalk doesn't do that. We don't play in the assortment analytics space. But assortment alone is probably not going to be enough to sway a buyer, especially if you're a brand new brand trying to get on shelf, right, for the first time, okay? You're going to have to come to them with some form of a formalized pricing study so that you can show them where they need to set price. And when they get into the game of promotion, how should they promote? How deeply? How frequently? So that they can maximize the revenue at shelf off of this product that they're willing to put on. Now, assortment and pricing studies, I think, have been part of the selling story for a long time, especially at the big brands, maybe not at the small brands, because again, this analytics hasn't always been available for some of the smaller brands. But for the big guys, this is nothing new. But the third thing that we think that retailers are asking about more and more now is the brand story. So, okay, you're telling me where my product needs to be priced. Your assortment study is telling me, yeah, okay, if I add it to the shelf, this is arguably quantitatively what it's going to bring. But I'm also responsible for creating a shopper experience when people walk in the store. And so I want to know what your brand is bringing from that brand health, emotional connection perspective that's going to enhance the feel of the shelf, not just the facings, if you will, on the shelf. So, to me, there's really 3 things that you need. And you probably need at least 2 of them. But if you came with all 3, I think your success rate with buyers would be pretty high.
It's interesting you mentioned story, because Tracy and I have spoken to people that cover the gamut of whether it's brand founders, investors, package design firms, etc. And it's interesting how the brand story keeps coming up, that you have to have something unique and ownable, whether it's an angle such as, natural, organic, or if you have coffee from a specific region, you're giving back to farmers. I mean, it's amazing how it's moved way beyond just sensory, which is still important, touch, taste, smell, etc. It's that story and what do you stand for. Tracy, back to you.
Yeah. So I'm just curious. I love what you said about having a brand story. Do you think that has a lot to do with the influence these days of social media? Do you think the story?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. And I'll give you another real world example here. Hopefully I don't get in trouble for naming names, but think about Yeti coolers. Okay. So if you think about Yeti coolers, did we really need a cooler that costs, 7 to 8 times what a regular cooler used to cost for decades? But they told a story and they created a brand allure around the product that consumers wanted to be associated with that brand. And they started selling direct, but now you can find Yeti in a lot of retailers, and they used that allure that they built to get on shelf. And I have to assume, given what they cost, they went in with some form of a pricing study that said, look, yeah, we're super expensive, but here's the consumer set that will buy us. And here's how that consumer set overlaps with your shopper set. And so you're not going to lose anything by giving us, 8 feet of shelf space and taking off Coleman or whoever they had to kick out, right, to get on shelf. But yeah, that was something that was built through a social groundswell, right? Yeah. That's how Yeti started. And I think that's a pretty good example.
No, that's a great example. So, Rick, talk to our audience today about how you help brands find their target consumer, and also about how you evaluate their, promotional and advertising spending.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with finding and understanding consumers first. Okay, so we call this brand health measurement and tracking. It has other names. Attitude and usage, or A&U, is one that you'll hear thrown around. But if I take all the fancy analytics titles off of it, at the end of the day, it's consumer research. And it's just smart, analytic-driven consumer research. And the way we do that with our clients today is we look at the category they play in. We survey consumers who shop that category, not just for them, but for their competitive set as well. And then we have a set of KPIs that we work with every brand we work with. They're not syndicated. They're not cookie cutter. They're unique to every client that we work with, where we understand what that brand or what that client thinks is important to the consumer set. And the first thing we do is we test it, because sometimes what the brand thinks is important is not really that important. So we test all of these KPIs and we go back to the brand and say, hey, look, you gave us 7, 8 KPIs. Really, only these 6 matter. Put these 2 on the cutting room floor because they're just not that important. Then we go out and we actually measure how consumers shopping the category score on those KPIs, not just for the brand that's our client, but for their competitive set. And what you get when you do that is a pretty robust set of data that not just tells the brand how they're doing. All the brands want to see, great scores across every KPI, right?
Sure.
But you need to see where your competitive set is outperforming you on a KPI or where you're outperforming them. Because when you have to go in and talk to that retailer, you need to focus where you're outperforming and say, look, this is what we bring to the table in terms of brand relationship with the shoppers of this category. So this is why you need to have us on shelf, or expand our presence on shelf, or allow us to raise our price, right? These things are really important, and it's the context that drives the importance when we do it. So that's That's the first thing we do. The second thing we do is more tied to media, and that's marketing mix, which we talked about a little bit at the beginning of this call, which is going through that process of understanding, hey, where is a brand investing their money? Should they be investing there? Could they invest more money there? Should they cut that line item out of their ad budget entirely and move that money into a different advertising channel? Should they cut their ad budget and move to price and promotion, right? Sometimes advertising isn't helping at all, and you'd be better off buying down price at shelf with an EDLP or something else like that, right? So when we think of marketing mix, a lot of people think of it just from the lens of media. We don't do that. We think of it from the lens of governing the business entirely, because that's the level of detail you get out of these studies and the power that they bring to the table.
So good.
Those are two big ones.
That's awesome. I love it.
So a follow-up here, Rick, you said something really interesting. So understanding the unique KPIs for each brand. So I'm going to wobble along here a bit, and you can tell me I'm wrong, which is fine. Tracy tells me that all the time. Let's use your coolers example. So understanding the KPIs for Yeti, let's pretend they're your client. Okay, so you've got, I'm making these up. Durability keeps things cold, blah, blah, blah. And then price. Price is always in there. What you don't want as a marketer is that's the only decision point, right? So
Correct.
is it best to make sure you understand the KPIs and where they're different? Because here's where I'm going. If I'm talking to a retailer and I'm representing Yeti and they have a big allocation to, say, Coleman, the real answer might be you need both. Okay. Yep. Because there's a certain number of people that either can't afford that or they just know themselves and they're not going to treat them well. So they buy a new one like every other summer because they beat the Jones out of it. Whereas, the Yeti people, if they're careful, you might buy one and it'll last over a decade. So is it understanding the KPIs and how the category puzzle fits, or do you have to defend each one?
I do think it's understanding the KPIs and how the puzzle fits. And this is something that, again, I think people outside of the CPG industry may not necessarily recognize. There are very few brands in CPG when they're lobbying to get on shelf, stay on shelf, or expand their presence on shelf that can just talk about their brand. You almost always have to tell a retailer, look, this is in context with the category at large. So you have to have those puzzle pieces. And I think you picked on a great example, right? I don't think there's a retailer out there that could just have Yeti on the shelf. Yeti's not my client. I want to be clear about that. So I don't know this categories as well as I probably should have. But there are probably not many retailers that just have Yeti, because there are probably not many retailers that serve only the high income consumer. Right. There's a handful, but that's not most of them, and certainly not in CPG, right? So you really have to think about it from that full category perspective.
Well, and it's interesting because one of Tracy and my bumper stickers for the Road to Retail show is buyers care much more about their category performance than your brand performance. So speaking and recognizing that that's how they earn their livelihood, right, is by having a successful category that's growing and hitting those metrics. All right, Rick, we're going to move into something that I'm juiced to talk to you about. So before you came on the show, you shared with us the very interesting research your firm has executed in the marketplace about the Tradeoff Consumer. So two things. Why don't you tell us who the Tradeoff Consumer is and what led you guys to decide to investigate this? And then, give us a few nuggets of the takeaway of these white papers. And folks, these are out there on the Big Chalk website. I would encourage you to go out there and download them, because economic times, people are making choices. So understanding what's going through their minds when they make these choices just may prove profitable to you.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this. Huge passion point of mine. It's probably the biggest research study we've done as Big Chalk over the course of the last 6 to 9 months. So we're super excited about it. And the papers are available for free. You don't have to buy them. They're up on the website for anybody to download. So how did we get here and what is it? So let me start with how we got here. Early in 2024, we were getting calls from clients who were looking at their Nielsen or their IRI data and noticing that volumes were slipping. And the macroeconomic data that you were seeing reporting in the news was that the macroeconomic condition is generally improving. Inflation is coming down, wages are going up. If you look at the Fed's numbers on consumer spending, they've been up, not as much most recently as they have in the past, but they've been trending up. So if all this macroeconomic data is saying, yeah, things are great, why are we seeing CPG volumes in a lot of categories start to slip? And that kind of got me thinking that sometimes when you work in CPG, you have to look outside of CPG to understand what might be going on. And so we developed a theory, probably in February or March of this year, that consumers suffered under high rates of inflation for a long time. And even though things are getting better, dramatically better, I mean, even the latest numbers are still pretty good, that cumulative effect of price increases was dragging on household spending habits and household incomes. And so we realized, all right, the only way we're going to really understand this, we can't just look at our Nielsen data or our Circana data. We're going to actually have to look at consumer spending holistically. So we gathered a ton of publicly available Federal Data Trade Association data, any data we could get our hands on that we trusted, that broke down all of the things that consumers spend money on a given month, whether that's rent or mortgage, whether it's car payment, whether it's insurance, whether it's, eating out of home, going to the movies. And then, of course, the CPG stuff, which we feel like we have a pretty good handle on. And we wanted to see what is the state of the consumer household budget. And our data indicates that as of June 2024, so it's getting a little dated, but June 2024, the typical US consumer was running right about break even. So people's savings rates were not very good. Depending on where they are on the income spectrum, they might be actually losing a little bit every month. About 7% of consumers that we surveyed felt they were falling behind each month. And so our thought process was, all right, consumers are going to have to start making trade-offs in the things that they buy. So where are they trading off? And we looked at 7 macro categories. So we looked at home expenses, mortgage, rent, like I talked about before, car expenses. We looked at leisure travel. So we excluded anything related to business travel. We looked at clothing and fashion expenses. We looked at out-of-home dining. We looked at out-of-home entertainment, namely movies. And then, of course, we looked at grocery, right, which is where our heart really lies. It's in the grocery category. And what we found was across those 7 categories, there was a subset of consumers who was cutting spend in 5 out of the 7 categories on average. And so we labeled these people the trade-off consumers. And they're 28% of the U.S. households, U.S. population. So it's a pretty large percentage of the population that's making these drastic changes. And we wanted to understand how they were shifting, budgets around. We also looked at them from the perspective of high-income consumers who really aren't changing their behavioral patterns at all, by the way. A little off topic for this particular segment, but the high-income guys are doing just fine, not really trading out of anything. But anybody that falls in this 28% is really making some pretty severe cuts, okay? The interesting thing about them, we initially assumed, oh, well, this is probably all low income. Not necessarily. Low income certainly feels the pinch more than high income, but it really comes down to the household budget. You can make a ton of money, but if you spend a ton of money every month, if you're stuck in a mortgage that eats 70% of your take home pay, you're going to feel just as poor as the guy who doesn't make that much money, but maybe spends it a little bit better than you do, right? So this 28% of consumers that we call the trade-off consumer is not just a low-income consumer, okay? They don't have any demographic skews. They don't have an age skew. They don't have a racial skew. Again, they have a very, very slight household income skew. So it's really people who are just, due to their monthly expenses, they have to trade off on certain things. So then the next question becomes, okay, how are they trading and where are they going? And that's what brings us to CPG, okay? And the implications you have if you're a CPG brand or a retailer or grocer, right, is these people are hurting. They're taking some money out of some discretionary things like leisure, travel, and dining out. The big one's probably dining out as it relates to the CPG industry. But when they come into the grocery store or they walk into Walmart or Target, how are they spending that money? And that's where things get really, really interesting. So in CPG, one of the hypotheses we had that was quickly debunked was, oh, they must be shifting to Costco and buying on volume, and because you're going to get a lot better price per volume when you buy on volume. That's not what they're doing. These folks are so cash strapped, they're actually trading down to smaller pack sizes because the smaller pack size is less out of their pocket that week. Okay. So it's a horrible trade-off if you think price per volume to go to the smaller pack size, but sheer management of weekly dollars, they have to do it. They're trading out of certain categories into functionally similar categories, right? Like let's take soft drinks. They're trading out of soft drinks and buying powdered drink mixes. Because again, the money you spend for a case of Coke or Pepsi compared to the money you spend for a powdered drink mix can give you 2, 3, 4 times the number of servings. They're willing to make that trade-off. And it varies a little bit from CPG category to CPG category. And this is all detailed in the report. So anybody who wants to know more about this, go download it and read it. But it's very, very interesting how they're making these trade-off decisions to make ends meet.
So let's flip one second here before we press to the next topic. So if I'm a brand manager and I've read your research and I'm seeing this same shift in my syndicated data, what can we do knowing that you just can't invent a new size, overnight and say, geez, no one's buying my 15 count anymore. And, maybe you don't have a 10 or a 6 count, depending what you're selling. What actions can you take? Because we all know as managers and commercial operations people, the one thing your CEO, he or she doesn't want to hear is, I don't know.
Yeah. So I would say the first thing you have to do is know your exposure. Okay. So I would urge anybody who has this question, and certainly reach out to us, Big Chalk, we can help you. But understanding if your shopper base is more or less than that baseline 28% of consumers, that's going to tell you how big the problem is specifically for your brand. Okay.
Interesting.
So our data is at a national level and at a category level when you look at the reports, but it's not necessarily by brand. So the first thing I would say to a brand manager that has that question is, what's your exposure? Okay. And again, we can help with that. Now, the second thing I would say, depending on which category you're in and what your exposure level is, let's say you can't just magically create a new pack size, which is obviously extremely difficult. to do in CPG. What other things are we seeing in the trade-off consumer subset for your category or your brand that you could do? Maybe it's depth of discount on promotion. Okay. So that could be one thing to get around the pack size problem, which is obviously a really difficult problem to solve. Okay. Maybe there's an alternate category that you're going to invest more in if you play in multiple categories that is more in tune with the way these trade-off consumers are trading down to prevent some of the leakage from your premium category. I'll take soft drinks as an example. I don't know if this is technically the best example, but if you owned a canned soft drink brand and you also owned powders, maybe you need to invest a little bit more to promote the powders right now to this particular group because you can't go switch your pack size on your cans as quickly as you would like. Okay. No. So there's a handful of different things you might do, but the first thing starts with just understanding your exposure and how are these consumers looking at your category and your brand specifically.
No, that's excellent. You got to diagnose the problem before you can address it. Tracy?
Yeah. So one of the topics that we talk a lot about on our show with our small emerging challenger brand audience is really the need for differentiation. You've got, consumers are just looking for that. Retailers are looking for that. So tell us a little bit about how you feel about the importance of differentiation and maybe an example of a product you've seen where they've really done a good job of differentiating themselves.
Yeah, I'm probably going to give you what's sort of a counterintuitive example here. Okay. Mm-hmm. But obviously, differentiation is, to your point, key to bringing the brand to market.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about a retail brand here. And it's a retail brand that we work with that struggles with customer service as a particular element, right? If you think of those brand KPIs, assortment on shelf, price, customer service is one that they struggle with. However, when we look at them in context with the other retail brands that they specifically compete with, we made a conscious decision not to try and differentiate on customer service because we realized that the core KPIs that were driving shoppers to this particular retailer were more around pricing and more around assortment than they were about expecting some sort of personalized or higher level customer service. This retailer had relatively low customer service scores. So the gut wrench reaction would be, oh, wow, these scores are low compared to the rest of the category. We really have to go invest in ops training and managerial training and try and change this. But at the end of the day, when we looked at those scores in context with the things that really drove this particular brand, the decision was made not to try and differentiate there. And so sometimes I think knowing what not to do is just important as knowing what to do. And that's an example that it has paid off in this particular case for this brand.
I like that. Yeah. So Rick, let's press in again with all the work you've done and all of your experience. Can you give us a market research success story that you were a part of, and what actions did the brand take? And sometimes I've been at the table when research firms present stuff, and it's not that I didn't trust them, but I was like, man, that is not what I was expecting. So then it kind of takes some courage to go implement that.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple. Again, I'll try to be as specific as I can without naming anybody or getting myself in trouble here. And what I'm going to tell you,
well, these are good ones, Rick. So they'd love to hear how smart they were.
They are good ones, but when I tell you the details behind this good one, you're going to see how I could quickly lose clients by opening my mouth.
Okay, well, we don't want that to happen.
But I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to barrel ahead. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm going to go back to the topic of marketing mix, which we've talked about a couple of different times. So a success story that we've had on the positive side, we've helped not just one, but actually a couple of different companies improve the revenue that's driven by their media by, I was going to say exponentially. I'm not sure if mathematically that's correct, but at least geometrically, right? Multiple times over. Okay. Now, how did we do that? Well, this is where I'm going to get myself into a whole bunch of trouble. But we looked at how media was performing in conjunction with trade. And what was happening was the dollars there's a couple of them. So these brands, I'll say plural, were losing to trade, could be transferred into their media, which was proving to be highly, highly effective. And so they didn't have a ton of extraneous marketing dollars, meaning they couldn't just go back to the CFO and say, yeah, we spent $5 million on media last year, and this marketing mix says we're doing so great, we should spend 10, which it did. They were really doing that well. If they had an unlimited fountain of money, that CFO should have given him 10 million, but he couldn't. So what do? You got to find the money somewhere. All right. Well, when we go and we look at trade, we realize, all right, this trade is extremely, extremely inefficient. So let's take some of that trade budget and move it into media and see if we can grow the business. And there's risk with that. Okay. As you guys probably know, trade isn't always about marketing. Trade is about maintaining relationships with retailers just to keep your product on shelf.
Greens fees.
So, great. Yes.
Yeah. Greens fees. Exactly. So to have those conversations with your accounts, with your retail partners, can sometimes be tricky. But in this case, the trade performance was so low. They were able to go to retailers and say, look, we're not getting anything out of this. There's no lift. There's no incrementality when we run these programs. Let's find a different way to run these programs, end up cut some budget, and then, take that budget, drop it right back into media. And again, we typically do clients like doing mix with us, again, because we're pretty fast and we're pretty cheap. And because of that, we tend to do mix with a client year over year over year. So we get to see what happens when we go recommend these changes and did they actually work. And in this case, the media-driven or marketing-driven revenue, which includes trade, went up by 3 to 4x. So huge, huge success story, which brings in more revenue for the brand, which ultimately lets you go back and do a little bit more in trade, even though it's not the most efficient thing. So rising tide lifts all boats in some situations, and this is one of those situations. And
if you drive enough sales, it offsets whatever greens fees you took back.
That's right. If I can win enough skins on the golf course, I can play some pretty nice golf courses.
Well, if you play me in golf, you'll win all of them. So there you go. Tracy?
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your favorite brand and why it's your favorite brand.
Yeah, when you guys sent me an email about this a few weeks ago, this was such a tough one for me to answer, but I think it's Ralph Lauren, which you can't tell from the T-shirt I so aptly wore to dress up for this podcast, but it's Ralph Lauren, and the reason why, there's a couple of elements. So first off, nobody can deny the emotional attachment they have to certain brands, right? So especially with clothing or fashion, it's like, oh, I see that. I like the way it looks. I want to wear it, right? It either works for you or it doesn't. There's plenty of clothing brands that I cannot and should not ever wear because they don't work for me. But Ralph Lauren is a brand that works. As a marketer, I love them because they walk that very tightrope of marketing to me, but not over communicating with me, not devaluing their brand, but they offer enough incentive at certain times that it keeps bringing me back and spending money. And to me, they navigate that tricky brand to consumer relationship perfectly. They do a great job. They touch me the right amount of times on a given month, whether it's through email or other communications. And they give me just the right amount of offers where I feel compelled to buy. And I love the products, and I continue to wear the products. So they kind of hit on all levels.
Great example. I love it. I love it.
Well, Rick, we're heading toward home plate here. So again, thank you very much for your time. Folks, I would encourage you to go out to the Big Chalk website and look at the two-part series on the Tradeoff Consumer. Very interesting stuff. Rick, if people wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to get in touch with you or your firm?
Yeah, there's two ways. So my email address is pretty simple. It's rick.miller@bigchalk.co, not .com, .co. That's the one thing I should probably stress there is we don't have the M on the end, but it's just my first name last name @bigchalk.co. And if you search Rick Miller and then Big Chalk on LinkedIn, you'll find me. And anybody who downloads those white papers, I'll get an alert that they downloaded. So you'll hear from me one way or another if you download one of those papers. And I would say one last thing that I forgot to mention before. We are going back into field for the Tradeoff Consumer in November, right after the election. And if there's any brands out there that want to co-sponsor that research, it's pretty inexpensive to do so. Hit me up and I'll give you the details, because we've got a handful of clients already on board, but we've got a couple slots still open. We're probably going to fill them between now and probably the end of next week. But if you want a certain category represented and you want some influence over the survey design, you can sponsor it, and we're taking calls for multi-client sponsors now.
Awesome.
That would be a great offer, folks, having been through those two papers. All right, Tracy, the big finish.
The big finish. Well, first of all, thank you, Rick, for joining us today. Very insightful, awesome. I know our audience is going to love that. And I just encourage our audience to follow us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and also our LinkedIn page, and look for this episode to run soon. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks
Good
so
luck
much,
out
guys.
there.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.